If there's something that has been talked about for ages and something that scares people is when you mention cancer. And when you hear a loved one has cancer, it's a scary thing. When you're diagnosed as having cancer, it's usually a scary thing. This is Now Tell Us. I'm your host, Anthony Mwerore. Today on our episode, we have an expert in this field of cancer, and he tells us that terminal cancer is a misdiagnosis. If you are as interested to know more about this as I am, now why not join me as we go together and meet our guest today, who is known as Danny Carroll. Ready? Here we go. Hello, Danny.
Anthony, how are you?
I'm fine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's such an honor to have you here because we are going to learn about this topic that I just introduced, and we are very eager to hear what you're going to tell us.
I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, and before we get started, we would like to know, where are you?
I'm currently in Dublin, in Ireland. I live between Ireland and India. Um, my permanent residence is in Bombay, in India,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife lives in Dublin, Ireland. So I shuffle between Ireland and India basically. So I'm currently in Dublin,
Okay.
which is a beautiful city.
What's the frequency?
Sort of a little less than half and half between India and Ireland.
Okay.
It depends, but about half and half. Split my
Wow.
time between the two countries basically.
That's
So
interesting to know.
yeah.
Now, let's know about you and when you were growing up and when you went to school and what did you decide to do with your life?
So I grew up in London. I spent my first 25 years living in London. I finished my studies at London School of Economics. I studied international corporate law at the London School of Economics, and I shifted to India in the mid 1990s, originally on a 6-month posting, and I've been there ever since.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful country. I love it. I have a passionate love affair with the country. I live in my permanent residence is in Bombay in India, and I've been there now for into my 28th year in India.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a great place.
Any local languages that you know?
I speak a very, I mean, in India there are 29 languages. It's very
Yeah.
similar to Europe. I speak one of the main Indian languages called Hindi, but very badly. I, I can I can eat, travel, curse. I can survive, but my Hindi is pretty poor, frankly, for the amount of time I've lived there. Um, it's an English-speaking country, right? So it needs the mother of all creation, and I speak as much Hindi as I need to. So
That's cool.
yeah,
Now, the word cancer is
the word
a word
cancer,
that just sparks some
horrors,
horrors in people's mind.
horrors.
When I
Yeah,
hear that on on radio, when I hear someone tell me mention cancer, I'm always ready, waiting to hear for the bad news.
yeah.
How did you come across? How did you come to be interested with this word and what it is that is happening?
It really started in about 2005. A friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer and couldn't afford the cancer treatment. So I ran a marathon in Bombay to raise the funds for her treatment. And when she went into hospital, I mean, they said she had cancer, right? But I mean, she looked perfectly fine to me. But anyway, she went in. I funded her cancer treatment, and she used to message me from hospital saying, "Danny, I don't know what these doctors are doing, but it feels like they're putting poison in my veins." And I didn't know any better at the time, so I encouraged her to continue the treatment. And after 3 rounds of chemotherapy, basically, she died. And, I mean, I was devastated. So I couldn't believe that in such a short period of time, she'd gone from what looked like being healthy to me to being dead. Um, so I committed at that point in time that I would try and find a better solution for cancer. And
Mhm.
I've spent the last 17 years researching cancer, and I've spent the last 7 years helping people who had been sent home to die by doctors uh, to fully recover their health, basically.
Hmm. And I'm curious to know, where was your friend? Was she in India or elsewhere?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
She was in Bombay, in India.
okay.
Yeah,
So you tell us it's
the
an
journey,
yeah?
the journey.
Is it
Well,
in
I spent I spent I studied every form of mainstream and alternative healing that I could find for cancer, including nutritional healing and emotional healing and energy healing and spiritual healing. And I studied the mainstream proposed treatments for cancer.
Mhm.
Um, but I had a, I had a, I'm a businessman, right? I'm not a doctor.
Okay.
Um, and I've spent many years in either management consulting or in venture capital and other business related areas. And the the simple principle that we've been taught, that if you want to solve a problem, you have to understand what we call input, process, and output. So you
Mm.
have to understand what causes the problem, how it gets processed, and what the outcome of that of that problem is. And
Mhm.
in order to solve that problem, unless you can address the cause of the issue, um, you'll just if you treat the symptom of a problem, you'll just keep treating the same problem over and over again.
Mm.
So the issue I had is I mean I did a TED presentation on nutritional healing in, I think, 2010. Um, but the problem I had with all forms of treatment that I was looking at
Mhm.
is that you could have two people with the same diagnosis and put them through the same treatment protocol, whether it's nutritional healing or emotional healing, and one would live and one would die. And it didn't matter how much I tried to find the answer to the problem. There was never an answer. People, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it happens, right? Some people live, some people die, but that wasn't good enough for me. I had to find out. I was obviously missing something, and I
Mhm.
couldn't I couldn't work out what it was that I was missing as to why it was always the case. One person lives, one person dies, and it didn't matter whether it was emotional healing or nutritional healing, and there were never any answers, Anthony. That was the issue,
Mhm.
and I wasn't happy just to allow the conclusion to be drawn that some people live and some people die. So I had a very interesting experience in 2012
Mhm.
where for about a 6 month period, my entire body, I'm talking all of the muscles in my body, my calf muscles, my thighs, my arms, my back, were riddled with golf ball sized knots.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm talking golf ball sized knots.
Okay.
And I was in physio for 6 months, and what happened is that when a physiotherapist is taking knots out of your muscles, basically they iron the knots out of your muscles
Mm.
with their elbows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's excruciatingly painful,
Mm-hmm.
excruciating. And what happened? I'd go in and I'd have these knots ironed out, and I'd go back 2 days later, and they come back again. Okay, and I was on this excruciatingly painful merry-go-round for a 6-month period. And I had an interesting challenge in my life at that point. My partner at that point in time was on a 2-month posting in Bombay,
Mm-hmm.
and her next posting was in Santiago de Chile.
Okay.
Okay, now that's 10,000 miles and a 40-hour journey from Bombay.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, we'd agreed that when she left Bombay, that we would terminate our relationship. Now, the problem was that we'd become soulmates, and
Mm.
when it came time for her to leave, we couldn't end the relationship, right? Because
Okay.
we just become so close. So on the Friday night before she was due to leave, we agreed that what we would do is we would not terminate the relationship. We would try this ridiculous long distance relationship and just see if the relationship fizzled out.
Mm-hmm.
And Saturday morning, I woke up and the knots had all disappeared from my body.
Interesting.
Okay, they just disappeared. Right.
Mm.
So 6 months, I've had my entire body riddled with the, and I'm a keen marathon runner,
Mm-hmm.
and at this point in time, I could barely walk, let alone run. So for 6 months, I'd had these knots in my body, and I literally riddled my entire body. And then Saturday morning, I wake up and the knots just disappeared.
Mm.
Um, and I'm like, wow, I mean, how did that happen? I mean, at that point in time, I didn't know why the knots had come,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know why the knots had disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference between Friday night and Saturday morning was that I'd come to a conclusion with my partner, that we wouldn't terminate our relationship, and the knots just disappeared.
Mm.
Now, then the Bombay Marathon's like a month away, right? And
Yeah.
normally training for a marathon takes me 3 to 4 months typically
Mm-hmm.
for a 26-mile marathon. So I trained for the marathon. And in the 6 months previous, because I hadn't done any running, I'd added 10 kilos in weight because I was just sitting around doing nothing. So in a month, I trained for the marathon. I ran the Bombay Marathon in 11 minutes short of my personal best with approximately 3 weeks of training.
Mm.
And that whole experience, Anthony, just blew me away.
Mm.
So all I could conclude from this experience is that the mind had the ability to both effectively cripple me and give me back my health at the snap of my fingers, right? I mean, Friday night I go to bed and I've got my body riddled full of knots, and Saturday morning I wake up and they've all magically just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So I planned to do a PhD. I had a hunch, I had a suspicion that if my if whatever caused those knots in my body could just disappear overnight, that there there could be a similar mechanism that related to the mind and cancer.
Mm.
So I was going to do a PhD to study if there was a linkage between the mind and cancer in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for a university that had both a medical specialization and a psychology specialization to see if I could sort of build a bridge between the two departments,
Mm-hmm.
and do a PhD to study to see whether there was any link between the mind and cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of looking for that university, I found this German medical doctor who was reported to have a 92% success rate in healing late stage cancer patients
Mm-hmm.
using a form of mind body medicine. Now, net, I've spent the last now 10 years studying that German doctor's medical discoveries that
Mm-hmm.
is the foundation of my book, Terminal Cancer is a Misdiagnosis. He had a very interesting story. In 1978,
Mm-hmm.
his 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 son, his 19-year-old son, was shot and murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was a bullet ricocheted and and he got hit by bullets, and it's 17 surgeries, and he died in his father's arms.
Mm-hmm.
Now his father um, is a German medical doctor called
Okay.
Dr. Richard Gerd Hummer. This German medical doctor, 2 months after his son died, he got testicular cancer and he got stomach cancer. Okay. He was given a 1% chance of surviving,
Mm.
and he survived. So he couldn't believe that. I mean, the traditional hypothesis of cancer is that cancer are abnormal cells, that uncontrollable growth with no known cause or any. And being a traditional medical doctor, he also didn't know if there was any link between his son dying and him getting cancer. He
Mm-hmm.
just he just couldn't believe it's a coincidence that. I mean, he was in his late 40s. Otherwise, he was a healthy guy. His son dies. 2 months later, he gets cancer in a reproductive organ. Okay, he
Mm-hmm.
couldn't he couldn't he didn't believe that it was a coincidence. He believed that there must be some causal link between his son dying and him getting cancer on a reproductive organ.
Yeah.
So at the time, he specialized in, he was what they call an internist, or a medical researcher was basically his specialization. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, he was the head of uh, a cancer research unit um, at a university in Germany called Tübingen University, which was basically associated with Munich University, and
Okay.
he was the head of cancer research for a gynecological oncology unit, which is basically specialized in female cancers, right? So
Mm.
he started into he was working with 200 female cancer patients, confirmed cancer patients,
Okay.
and he started to interview. He wanted to know whether they had gone through a similar emotional trauma to him before they got cancer, and out of 200, 200 had. Okay. And when he started to put them into separate buckets of women with cervical cancer and ovarian cancer and breast cancer, etc., what he observed is that the women in the same buckets suffered from the same type of cancer. They experienced the same type of trauma. So all of the women, for example, who had ovarian cancer, had all suffered from some form of profound loss, in the same way that he'd suffered from a profound loss when he got testicular cancer,
Mm-hmm.
when his son died in his arms. Now, fast forward 39 years of cancer research and 50,000 cancer patients later, what this German doctor discovered is that cancer is not a random event that happens for no reason. And if you look at his case in particular, his son was shot and murdered. He
Mm-hmm.
got testicular cancer. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
now what he discovered is that the tumor that grew on his testicle actually had a biological function and a biological purpose. Okay, the tumor on his testicle, basically what it did is it increased his ability to produce testosterone and produce sperm, so that he had a greater capacity and a better chance of getting his wife pregnant to be able to replace the child he just lost.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And once he understood the connection between the function of an organ and how it gets affected with a particular type of trauma, what he basically concluded is that cancer is not the disease that randomly spreads around your body like a foreign invading army, which is what we are led to believe today.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually part of nature's survival function. Okay, nature nature has nature wants us to survive.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and our biology is set to increase or decrease our function in times of trouble in order to help us to solve a problem. So
Mm-hmm.
all of the all of the organ organs in our body, basically what happens is the capacity is either increased or decreased based on what we need to overcome a challenge. So in this doctor's case, his son was murdered,
Mm-hmm.
so he just lost a son.
Yeah.
So what nature has done is nature has increased his capacity by increasing the size of his testicle to increase his sperm and testosterone production, to give him the ability to be able to have a better chance of replacing the child he just lost. Okay,
Yeah.
and that basically is the same with any organ function. Now, to understand how our organ capacities increase and decrease based on what we need to survive, the easiest way to understand it is if you look at a woman's menstrual cycle. A woman's menstrual cycle,
Yeah.
basic during part of the menstrual cycle, tissue is added to the walls of the uterus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in order to, so if she gets pregnant, she can hold the egg in the uterus. If she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't get, if she, so tissue is added to the uterus. If she doesn't get pregnant, the tissue is removed from the uterus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, removed with bleeding and often with cramps and pain. Okay, so
Yeah.
tissue is added and tissue is removed. Now, that basic biological function is what happens in all of our organs when we face challenges in life. So, this doctor faced a challenge where his son was shot and murdered. So, what nature has done is added tissue to his testicle so that he has a better chance of getting his wife pregnant so that he can replace the child he's just lost. And once he understood the biological mechanism, the survival mechanism that which is how cancer functions, and basically what he was able to do is to unravel cancer for every organ and for every part. And once he completed cancer, he effectively unraveled the biological code. And his medical findings are really quite extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
That's in a nutshell.
And I'm curious to know because you mentioned you link the test the cancer that the man had with his reproductive ability, and I'm curious. about the other organs, because you mentioned it is just about the same. But for example, if I have lung cancer, how could
Mhm.
it be linked? What could be going on? What could be the end result expected? What could be the trigger?
Very interesting, right? So think about oxygen, right? I mean, if you look at all of the inputs we have,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's water or it's food or it's oxygen. I mean, food you can survive for weeks without food. Water you can survive for days without water. Oxygen you can only survive for minutes without oxygen before you die, right? So the lungs basically, if we have what this doctor described as a fear of death conflict, okay, and the fear of death can be for yourself or in fact for a loved one, then
Mm-hmm.
basically what happens is the capacity of the lungs is increased in order to help us to better intake and process oxygen to stop us from dying, because it's all a survival mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And that survival mechanism basically is what we call lung cancer, the increased capacity in order to process oxygen. And it's the same in any of the organs that we have. If you look at the liver, I mean, the liver is very complex, it has many functions. Okay, but one of the primary functions is to produce digestive enzymes. Okay, now the liver is very interesting as well, right? The common belief in modern medicine is that the liver is affected by the main body of the liver is affected by alcohol poisoning, right? So
Yeah.
alcoholics
Mm-hmm.
get liver cirrhosis and liver cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at alcoholics, the thing about alcoholics, if you've ever met an alcoholic, is that they will very often not eat in order to be able to consume alcohol. Their
Yeah.
focus their focus is to drink
Mm-hmm.
and not eat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the liver, the main body of the liver, actually gets affected by what this doctor described as a starvation conflict. So if your body thinks that you're starving, then the capacity of your liver is increased. Now, this can be borne out if you look in Africa, right, where people are actually starving. You'll see if you see young children on TV when they're starving, right? They have distended stomachs, but the distension on the stomach very often is at the top of the stomach here, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically the liver increasing in size. And the biological purpose of that is so the liver can consume the energy in your body better to stop you starving to death.
Mm-hmm.
So once you then start consuming food on a regular basis, then the liver will then go back to its original size once the survival trigger of the fear of you starving to death has then been effectively switched off.
Okay. The book, Terminal
The
Cancer,
book.
the Misdiagnosis. Discover palliative care alternative medicine that you can survive. Now, what's in it?
So this is it's an autobiographical journey of the last 17 years of my life,
Mm-hmm.
explaining the 17 years of research that I've done into cancer
Mm-hmm.
and the primary medical discoveries that this German doctor, Dr. Richard Hammer, made during his lifetime. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2017. So
From
it
cancer? From cancer of.
no, no, he had a stroke and died. As a long backstory to how he died. That's a
Okay.
maybe that's another book in itself, right?
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean for it essentially contains. You can't say the cure for cancer because Cancer is not a disease, right? It's a
Yeah.
survival program. So it
Uh-huh.
describes cancer, the survival program, how it functions, and I've attempted to describe it in a way that anybody with no knowledge of medicine and no knowledge of cancer can read, understand, and consume, so that you can come away from the subject with a basic understanding of what cancer really is.
Okay. Why did you choose the word misdiagnosis? Uh,
Because because it is. I mean, the common belief is that as a cancer is this disease that spreads around your body like an invading army, killing you from within, um, and it's just not true.
mhm.
It's incorrect. It's biologically incorrect. And in the book I have attempted to explain why it is incorrect and support it by all the facts that you need in order to come away understanding why it is a misdiagnosis.
Okay. So, in short, everything that we have discussed, everything that you told us, is what is contained in the book, and therefore we we say it is the terminal cancer that is a misdiagnosis, and that's why you. When is it being published? Because I understand it's not out yet.
It's not out yet.
Mhm.
Hopefully within the next 2 weeks, I'm going to publish it
Okay.
initially on my website.
Hmm.
Um, I will hopefully be putting it up on mainstream Amazon, Barnes and Noble, those types of places in the next 3 months.
Okay.
But within about 2 weeks, you'd be able to pick it up on my website,
And your website is,
danny-carroll.com.
that's www.dannycarroll.com.
danny-carroll.com. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, for anybody who be interested to know much more about the book, you can hop on to dannycarroll.com. That is danny-carroll.com.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like our time is over here in this episode, but then you've told us quite enough. And is there something that you'd like to add before we are gone?
Yeah, I mean, this book is an introduction to the subject. I'm now writing one book on every disease. Um, I've written a book on breast cancer, one on testicular cancer, one on IBS, ulcerative colitis, and one on atopic dermatitis. I will be writing hopefully one book every month, one on each disease, and that will be going up on my website. 4 books are up already, and I will be adding those books up as I write them.
Okay, that's good. So, thank you very much. We really thank you, Danny, for coming to our show. And
Absolute pleasure, Anthony.
yes, and we also thank all our viewers, those watching us live. I see we have people watching us, a few,
Nice.
and is they are going to still continue watching or listening to it after we are through. We thank all of you for taking your time to go through, and remember to head on to danny-carroll.com and connect with Danny for the rest of what he's talked about, and especially to be informed about the forthcoming book. Now, before we sign off, we would like to ask you to leave us with a few words that we should always remember. What are your words, Danny?
Dr. Hummer always used to say it's difficult to teach somebody to swim when they're drowning. It's always better to learn to swim before you get in the water. With cancer, it's always better to learn how your body functions biologically before you get sick. Don't wait till you get sick in order to understand how your body functions.
Mhm.
I've started learning 10 years ago. The place I live is a place where there's no fear of disease. It's a beautiful place. Come and join me.
Mm. Thank you for those words. And once again, we appreciate your time here.
Thank you, Anthony. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, so that's about it. This has been Now Tell Us. I've been your host, Anthony Morore, and together with our guest today, Danny Carroll, we are saying bye for now. Learn to swim now.
Learn